regulation of respiration. So this regulation of respiration is basically mediated by two regulatory mechanisms. One is neural regulation and the other one is chemical regulation. And the neural regulation, chemical regulation, this neural regulation is mediated by two structures. One is medulla and the other one is pons. This medulla has two centers, dorsal respiratory group and ventral respiratory group. And pons has two centers, pneumotactic center and apneustic center. Okay. And this chemical regulation, it is mediated by chemoreceptors. You have central chemoreceptors and peripheral chemoreceptors. Okay, so now we will talk about this dorsal respiratory group. This dorsal respiratory group, it is the inspiratory center. Okay, this dorsal respiratory group is responsible for giving signal in a rhythmic way. So how the regulatory mechanism is involved? This is the neural regulation and this is the pons, this is medulla. In the medulla you have the dorsal respiratory group and here you have the ventral respiratory group. The dorsal respiratory group gives signal to the inspiratory muscle. Which is the inspiratory muscle? Primary inspiratory muscle. Diaphragm. How it is giving signal to the diaphragm? Through the glossopharyngeal and the vagus nerve. It will not give the signal to the diaphragm directly. It will give signal to the spinal cord. From the spinal cord, what are the spinal cord fibers which is supplying the diaphragm? C3, C4, C5 keeps the diaphragm alive. Remember this, C3, C4, C5 is supplying the diaphragm. So once when the dorsal respiratory group is giving the signal, then the diaphragm performs the contraction process. Normally the dorsal respiratory group is having the stimulus duration of 5 seconds. In that 5 seconds, the signal will be present only for 2 seconds. Remaining 3 seconds, there is absence of signal. This is the mechanism which gives way for the expiration to take place passively. Okay. And ventral respiratory group, it is called as the expiratory center, but it is not having a major role during normal breathing. Only during forced breathing, this ventral respiratory group will give the signal. What signal it will give? It will just give inhibitory signal to the dorsal respiratory group. The spinal cord is getting the signal always from the dorsal respiratory group. And when you talk about the pneumotaxic center, this is the switch between the inspiration and the expiration. And the dorsal respiratory group is remaining active only for 2 seconds, but the remaining 3 seconds it is not remaining active. It is because during the stimulus period, this pneumotaxic center is giving inhibitory signal to the dorsal respiratory group. So it switches off the inspiratory signal and makes the expiration to happen in a passive way. Okay. And what is this pneumotaxic center? When it gets stimulated, it becomes prolonged breathing, apneusis. That you call it as apneusis. So this pneumotaxic center also giving inhibitory signal to the apneustic center as well as the dorsal respiratory group. So this is how the neural regulation is performing its function. And when you talk about the central chemical regulation, as the name, This is going to happen based upon the partial pressure of oxygen and the carbon dioxide. Okay, this central chemoreceptors, they are present close to the dorsal respiratory group. So this central chemoreceptors get stimulated in the presence of increase in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. But this will get the direct signal from the H plus. During chloride shift mechanism, bicarbonate is splitting, the carbonic acid is splitted into bicarbonates and H plus ion. So if there is excess of H plus, that will give signal to the central chemoreceptors, indicating that there is increase of carbon dioxide, and this central chemoreceptors will give signal to the dorsal respiratory group to perform the inspiratory process. And the peripheral chemoreceptors. These peripheral chemoreceptors are located, as we have seen, at the arch of aorta, aortic bodies, and at the level of carotid artery, the place where the carotid artery bifurcates into internal carotid artery and external carotid artery. You have a small swelling, enlargement, that is called as carotid bodies. And at the arch of aorta, you have aortic bodies. They are the peripheral chemoreceptors. These chemoreceptors will sense when there is decrease in the partial pressure of oxygen. Okay. So central chemoreceptors is being sensed when there is increase of carbon dioxide, but carbon dioxide crosses the blood-brain barrier and it is converted into H plus by the chloride shift mechanism, and this H plus will give signal to the central chemoreceptors. H plus will not cross the blood-brain barrier. So after crossing the blood-brain barrier, the carbon dioxide is shifted into H plus, and that gives the stimulus. For peripheral chemoreceptors, decrease in the partial pressure of oxygen, hypoxic state will give the signal. Okay, clear? And then few respiratory disturbances we will see. Main thing is hypoxia. Hypoxia, we will have 4 subtypes. One is hypoxic hypoxia, that is decrease of oxygen at the level of atmosphere. So atmosphere is having decrease in the oxygen, but the other internal systems is normal. So that is called as hypoxic hypoxia. And next one is anemic hypoxia, where you will have decrease in the RBC or decrease in the hemoglobin. Okay. And stagnant hypoxia. This is due to the sluggish blood flow. It may be of any cause, whether there is decrease of cardiac output or any cardiac disorders, or when there is thickness increase in the blood vessels. It causes stagnancy in the blood flow. It delays the delivery of oxygen to the level of cells and causes hypoxia. At last is the histotoxic hypoxia, that is at the level of cells. When the cell is not in a position, when the cytochrome of the cell is disturbed, then the cell will not accept the oxygen delivered by the blood vessels. There is some abnormality in the internal cell environment, but that gives signal as hypoxia. Okay, clear? So that is called as histotoxic hypoxia at the level of cells. And one small case we are having here. A healthy 30-year-old man ascends the Mount Everest. Okay. And as he is climbing, ascending, he begins to feel dyspneic. And what is the cause in the shortness of breath? Compare it with hypoxia. Which type of hypoxia? What is the mechanism behind hypoxic hypoxia? Atmospheric oxygen is low. So it is hypoxic hypoxia. What will he do actually to compensate? How he will compensate at that moment? In the Mount Everest, while he is climbing, he will also carry the oxygen cylinder along with him. What is the compensatory mechanism our body is doing? Hyperventilation. immediately you will have hyperventilation. Our regulatory mechanism will increase the rate of respiration, and all the hypoxic signal will give signal to the kidney to produce more and more of erythropoietin. Okay, so what happens? Increased RBC will be produced. The person will face polycythemia to correct the hypoxic state. Okay, so these are the basic compensatory mechanisms the person will auto-regulate when he is in the high altitudes. Already climbing the mountain is a difficult task and you want to climb along with oxygen cylinder to compensate. Good. Okay, so that is the scenario in high altitudes. And another respiratory disturbance is cyanosis. What you define as cyanosis? Bluish discoloration of the skin and the mucous membrane. Why? What? Hypoxia? No. This cyanosis is experienced when you encounter more than 5 gram percentage of deoxygenated hemoglobin. Normally, hemoglobin will combine with both oxygen and the carbon dioxide. During exchange process, this will happen. But if the concentration goes more than 5 gram percentage for a longer period of time, then you will consider it as a cyanotic stage. It may be either hemoglobin deficiency or hemoglobin go and join with other molecules like carbon monoxide, methemoglobin, sulfhemoglobin, so many. Okay, but altogether deoxygenated hemoglobin more than 5 gram percentage will encounter cyanosis. Okay, clear? And few abnormal patterns of respiration. The first one is chain stroke breathing. In chain stroke breathing, you will not have this is normal regulatory pattern. But in case of chain stroke breathing, you will experience waxing and waning pattern of breathing. There is a gradual increase in the rate of respiration that is called as waxing, followed by gradual decrease in the rate of respiration. And followed by this, you will have a period of apnea. And again, the waxing and the waning pattern of breathing will be continued. And Biot's breathing is total abnormal rhythm of the respiration. Either you will have hypercapnia or hypopnea, no breathing apnea. So it will be in an irregular pattern. And Kussmaul's breathing, everyone will experience early morning when you go inside the toilet. Yes? Yes or no? For defecation purpose. Closing all the glottis and everything, and if you respire, that abnormal pattern is called as Kussmaul's breathing. And up to this, we will finish the respiration. Okay, clear?